slow your retreat, but sure is dawning. Leaving but memories, strive as you may. Looms the abyss of eternity's yawning into its maw and forever away. Chapter 4. Fired from the DDD. As for myself, during my stay with the DDD, I never branded a brood of any kind, but I roped many a good one for the other fellow to put the hot iron to. I was only a kid then working for the other man, and I had to face the stark realities of life at a very tender age. I heard a lot and saw a lot, but said little. I was getting an education, but not from books. Dad tried to get me to come back and finish school, but I was destined to wander. I rode bad horses for extra money to send to them. I killed fur-bearing mammals in the winter while their furs were good and sold them and kept nothing out for myself. Then at night I sang songs to the cowboys and played the fiddle, as I had learned to play by listening to Dad. Once I quit the outfit and went back home to try to go to school. Dad was able to work again, and he begged me to come back and study. Things were changed. I had been gone 3 years, and a shirt-tailed kid like myself couldn't see that learning was important. I quickly began to resent Mother's advice, and wouldn't tolerate my sister's quick tongues about my lack of manners and my bad language. Soon Dad saw I was determined to make my own way. There was no turning back to the plow, and it was seemingly too late for the books. He called me to the cowpen one day after Mother had tongue-lashed me good for my profane language, which she wasn't supposed to have heard. He told me then he could see I was a cowboy through and through. He said, "You left home just a lad to help us, but almost overnight you had grown up and made your own way. I will never ask you to come back and go to school." That was the day he set me free of my obligations towards the family, and I continued to send money. The DDD back then was a hard name, and Mother tried to tell me of all the bad influence I was coming in contact with. I tried to assure her that I was not influenced by the men I was forced to associate with. I left home, but with a saddened heart. I joined up with the wagon boss, Bob Eichard, who took a personal liking to me. I loved the land and the territory. The Comanche territory was one of the best grazing countries at that time, but since has become one of the garden spots of the world. Its dark sandy soil with its dark red clay formed foundation makes it an ideal country for most any crop. Its prairie branches, clothed in a luxurious growth of timber, and in some parts streaks of level prairie, covered with timber, and the open prairie make it a sight to behold. But the chain of mountains running east and west through it makes it picturesque as well as valuable and fertile. One day, while I was riding the pasture fence that had the thoroughbred mares in it, I saw a mare by herself, and she seemed to be looking down most of the time. I went to see why she wasn't with the other mares and colts, and when I was within 100 yards of her, she left and went to the others. I went to where she had been, and there was a newborn colt in a 4-foot hole. I got him out, and he followed my horse to the ranch. The boss and I pinned the mares and put the colt with its mother. She wouldn't claim it. She wouldn't let it nurse. I was told to kill the colt and let its mother go back to the bunch. I asked for permission to try to raise the little fellow on the bottle for my own. No one thought the colt would live, and permission was granted. It was a blue roan in color and a real thoroughbred. I babied the little thing and got him on his feet. I had 2 fine horses now of my own. The territory all around was opened for the settlement. The big cattlemen were moving their stock out of the country. Wagoner had bought many thousands of acres in Wilbecker, Wichita, Baylor, and Hardin counties, and was fast moving cattle there. We worked hard almost day and night. I had grown to be 5 feet 6 inches tall and weighed 140 pounds. I was a healthy, active young man and supremely happy in the open air. I was content in spite of my old lofty existence. I saw many changes taking place in the land, but all things must change for progress. I did not want to see the cattle penned in. It was a struggle for me to find my place at times. While at work one day, Bob told me that old Nestor, who lived near the Red River, had 3 unbranded calves that were weaned from their mothers. He wanted me to go down and help them across the river. Then the boys from the ranch could pick them up the next morning. I knew that he wasn't doing anything uncommon, but I remembered another Nestor a few years back who lost all his cattle in such a way. I remembered, too, a small sprat of a boy trying to keep the cowboys from rounding them up as strays. I didn't want to go. I told him if he didn't have any other kind of work for me to do, I would just get my bedding and drift. He looked at me in complete surprise. I will not steal to hold my job, I told him flatly. So, stepping high as a rooster in mud, I gathered up my gear and moved on. I knew I could find work of some kind, for I was far from lazy. I worked next for a man for $2 a day, pitching hay and cooking. It was while I was at his farm that I met Buck Beckingham, Joe's brother, and Dave Tidwell. I made a few extra dollars among the farmers riding some of their workhorses and mules that they thought were bad. These 2 bachelors would make up a purse and see me wipe 'em out, as they called it. It would be told around that I would ride a certain horse at Sunday, and people would show up to see the little bronc buster at work. I was often referred to as a kid from the Comanche territory. I would get anywhere from $2.50 to $15, according to the size of the crowd and the reputation of the horse I was to ride. I would ride with circle or with a saddle, and at any amount I could ride either way. Buck Beckham and Dave both liked to gamble and drink. Old Dave would work all day for a quart of Hill and Hill. Buck began to drink heavily after Joe's untimely death, but both men made good partners. When they introduced me to anyone, they had a favorite story or two to tell. They told how I could ride a steer just as well as a horse. When the opportunity afforded itself, I would ride up by the side of a steer, jump from my well-trained horse's back to the back of the steer, light upon his back where his hips come up to the backbone, hook my spurs deep into his flanks, and rear back. This always brought loud cheers from the crowd. Buck and Dave knew how to draw the people. Dave would tell our friends about the time I was riding in the lead of 3,000 herd of stampede big biff steers. My horse stepped into a prairie dog hole, turned a catapult in the air, and threw me clear from him in front of the surging, frightened herd. Before my horse could get up, the steers were stumbling over him, he would say. A big steer that was the lead picked me up and carried me to safety upon its back until my companion could make his way to the lead of the herd, and after the steers had run themselves down, he took me from the back of the panting steer, hatless and without my 6-shooter. To show my skill with the rope, one of my partners would run his horse at full speed at me, and I would catch any foot or any 2 feet of the horse that anyone asked me to catch. Usually we got an invitation to supper after the shows. Since Buck was a good singer, we were given jobs for entertaining the children. I told my children stories in the way and the territory of the strange ways of the Indians. I showed them how to talk Comanche Sign Language. All the Beckhams were musically inclined, but Buck made up many of his own songs. While driving a herd to Dodge years before I knew him, he made up a song he called Get On, Little Doggy. That song has many different versions to it now, but it was picked up by the ranches by different cowboys and passed on. He also wrote what he called the Sunday School March, and his brother Jim and wife Katie used to play that song to their 2 children for evening entertainment in the home. I loved Buck in those days. He was good to every kid he saw. I can still remember how he patted them on the head and just happened to have a stick of candy when he saw a little tot. He would tell the crowds we gathered about how I left my home at the age of 12 to help Dad feed the kids back home. He knew I was fired from the DDD because I wouldn't steal from poor nesters. He knew how to draw a big crowd. Old-timers who remember the Beckham boys, or remember hearing their parents talk, have many good things to say. Most of the folks in Matador felt Joe Beckham was railroaded about the county funds for political gain. I heard of Joe many times from Buck, who grieved all his days about his baby brother as he did the other boys. In the words of Lula Beckham Cates, Jim's daughter, Uncle Buck was a favorite of the family in spite of his weakness for liquor. Joe was our baby uncle, Roderick Carroll Beckham Jr., was much like his hot-headed grandfather who went to the Civil War from Nashville. He acquired the name Buck in a very odd way. Very few folks ever knew he had another name. When he was about 6 years old, the Yankees used to go marching by their house, which sat on a hill. The front yard gate was part of the big tree that the Buck heard the Yankee soldiers coming, and he would run to perch himself on top of the flat-topped gate post and began cursing the first Yankee who came in sight, and cursed them until the last one disappeared over the hill. The soldiers thought this was very funny from such a little boy, so they began to yell at him as soon as they were within hearing distance, "Hello, Buck!" And he would curse even louder then. Buck's brothers teased him unmercifully about every girl he had. Then he would drop the young lady to get the brothers quiet. He never married, and often Jim and John would say they should have left him alone. They felt Buck would have left off the drunk had married and had a family. He died in 1914 at John's home, helplessly addicted. In 1900, Buck decided he wanted to go to the Klondike, but when he learned of the expensive equipment, $500, he would have had to have, he abandoned the idea. He was at our house in Frost, Texas, when he decided to roam again, and the picture of him as he strode across the green cotton fields on the Hoosier farm is just as vivid in my mind as if it were looking at the same scene this morning. I never again saw my dear uncle alive. He returned to that country in 1912, but I was living in Richland at the time, and people didn't get around then as they do now. Mom and I went to his funeral. He is buried in a country cemetery in the middle of a Hoosier farm at the east side of Ellis County, between Frost and Italy, Texas, just off the road. Mrs. Clay Blindley, Dave's sister, kept all my winnings for me so I wouldn't lose it or get it stolen. I stayed with her when I wasn't working. She proved to be a good friend to me later. I used to wait on her or the children any time they got sick. I ran errands for her. I also waited on Buck many times when the juice got the better of him. When all the work was done, Mr. Lindley had to let his hands go. I was the last to leave. It was near Christmas, and I decided to visit home. I had some $1,500 in bills and about 90 of them in silver. I wanted to save my money and watch the happy glow on the face of my mother when I handed it to her. It was to be their nest egg, and I was proud of myself for having been able to give it to them. I knew the girls would finish school, and Dad could buy himself some farming equipment. Many times I thought of all that I could do with such money. I had ridden many a bad horse to get that extra money. So I headed for home with joy in my heart. I went a mile west of town and camped and fed my horses. I had fancy daydreams of how glad they would be to see me. I thought my mother weeping because I had brought prosperity to them at last. I was a little over 15, so I knew Dad would have just shaken my hand and hold tightly. These dreams were short-lived. When I reached home, I went into the house through the back door into the kitchen. I tried to be quiet, but the silver in my bag made considerable noise. Mother rushed in from her bedroom, and when she saw the money, her face turned ashen. With money I'd been sending home, Dad had bought a house. "Son, where did you get it?" Mother cried. Her hand flew to her mouth in utter dismay. Dad rushed into the kitchen. He, too, looked at the money, and then exclaimed, "Take it back. I won't rest a minute with that kind of money here." "Take it back," Mother added, "to where it belongs." She sat down in a kitchen chair and began to rock back and forth with her arms folded. I began to try to tell my family where I'd gotten the money and how, but neither would listen. Neither my mother nor my dad believed me. The other kids came in and heard me being accused. I was hurt considerably over their lack of trust and embarrassed that they had let my sisters and brothers hear. I suppose it was the first time I actually faced the fact that they considered me a ruffian and unfit. I sat down at the table and fought back childish tears. I looked at my earnings as I racked my hand across the table and dumped the money back into my sack. A tear had to fall. My lips quivered as I thought of those sickening daydreams. How I longed for their approval and acceptance of me. I've been lonely many times in my life, but the hurt was never as acute as it was then. They had all lost faith in me, for no reason at all. I spoiled what might have been a happy Christmas for them by returning. Dad paced the floor most of the night. I could not sleep, and after the hurt subsided a bit, I began to resent the fact that I hadn't been given a chance to explain. I went out to the place where I'd staked my two horses and sat on the ground. First, I kicked at the dirt with my boot heel, and then I lay face down and cried out. I let self-pity rule for the first time that night. I kept remembering how I had left home to help supplement the income so that others could eat, go to school, and wear good clothes. I thought of the mean horses I'd ridden, the furs I had sold, the sacrifices I had made. At some unknown time between heavy sobs, I fell asleep on my slicker. The next day I wrote to Mr. Lindley and asked that he write my parents. I asked him to tell them how I earned the money. I told him my folks thought I'd stolen it. Soon a letter came from Mrs. Lindley to my mother. She told Mother what a fine young man she thought I was, and that I would never steal or lie. She told her many of the times I cared for her children, and about the errands I used to run for them. Dave wrote that he would be down to visit me in a week or two. He said Buck had wandered over into Denton County. He had been unable to locate him. During the time I waited for Dave, Mother began to upbraid me for betting and riding bad horses. She said I had been playing cards and next I would be drinking. She was sure I would come to no good. Once she told me I would hang before I was grown. After Dave came, the matter was cleared. He stayed a few weeks with us and then went his way, and I never saw him again. By spring, I was more than ready to move on. I had become shockingly aware of the fact that I no longer fit in my family's social realm. I packed my belongings and headed for New Mexico. I was tired of having my table manners criticized, and my sisters teased me about my shabby clothes. I was an embarrassment to them. I must admit I had picked up the cursing habit. Mother would fly into me for being abusive around the girls. I didn't like the tame life I was expected to live around at home. My final decision to move on came when my mother brought a preacher around. I came home one evening with a load of wood and a cowhide on the wagon. Dad introduced me to the preacher. I stuck my blood-stained hand out for a shake, but he suggested we wait. I laughed and drew back my paw, wiping the blood down the leg of my jeans. And I went about my business. By night he commenced to lecture me about going to New Mexico. I knew Mother had been talking to him. She had felt he might talk some sense into an empty head. What she didn't know was that I had already met the preacher 5 years ago. He was a hijacker, a gambler of the lowest sort, and a few other things it takes to be one of the really bad men. I found it hard to see any reform in him. Probably I wasn't looking. He was called Morefoot. He weighed about 250 pounds and stood 6 feet and 9 inches tall, and was about 16 inches of the small end of his leg turned down to walk on. He had the largest hands I've ever seen. He was known in those parts as a giant preacher. I sat and listened and never said a word until I had put some wood on the stove and happened to knock a few coals of fire onto the floor. I picked them up with my fingers and dropped them into the hearth. Moore said, "You're trying to get used to the fire, are you, before you go to hell?" Then he snickered. I looked him right in the eyes, unsmiling. He had gone too far. "Don't you remember me?" I asked him bluntly. "Don't you remember seeing me at Sutter's Line Camp on a certain night in August of '96? "No, I was in those parts, but don't place you, kid." I helped jog his memory. I watched him turn pale as I talked. "Remember a small boy and a fellow named Bill Sutters? I'm that boy. I'm the one who killed the fawn. I saw you and the young boy who came with you and Bill playing cards that night. You cheated him out of his money. The boy caught you. You cursed and cavorted until the boy called your hand and you settled down a bit. I saw you, preacher, ride off with the boy. The next day I came upon him lying face down in the creek. He had been shot in the back as he rode up the bank ahead of you on the trail. I saw the blood on the ground, and the preacher's big footprints plainly where he had squatted beside the boy and emptied his pockets. He dragged him a few feet, then rolled him over on the bank. I buried him as best I could, but I've also seen the giant preacher in Greer County in the white slave business. I may go to hell, preacher, but not for shooting boys in the back and robbing and peddling women and hiding behind God's word. Pray for your own black soul, you louse, and leave me alone." I left the room in a huff, but the man admitted to my family that I was telling the truth about him. He bade them a hurried good night. Early the next morning, I kissed my family goodbye and rode out of their lives. Little did I realize I would not see my loved ones again for many more than a few hours at a time, and that many years would separate us, and many heartaches would follow me. I rode straight west into Hale County. I stopped and worked for 2 months, as it was dry farther west, and work would be hard to find. I worked for a man named Simpson who had 3 lovely daughters. I fell in love the moment I saw Pearlie Simpson. I loved her harder than thunder could bump a stump. But I kept it to myself. Several times she tried to draw me into conversations, and I would down my head and stare at the floor like a goof. She played childish pranks on me, was mischievous, and all did the silly things girls do when they're flirting. This family had originally lived in Wilbarger County. They knew Dad well. I was never at home long enough to know any of the family friends, though. Pearlie had cast a spell on me, and I was ready to tell her 1 minute, afraid of her the next. I had never had a girlfriend. One morning I had taken the milk to the milk house, which was at the windmill. I had one door, and when I turned to go out, she was guarding the entranceway, blocking my way. She threw back her pretty head and laughed at me and motioned for me to come closer to her. She had beautiful, devilish eyes and long, silky hair. I told her that I was a worthless cowboy and had nothing to call my own. I mentioned to her that I thought she was the one for me, but I would be moving away soon. About that time, Mr. Simpson walked up behind her and stepped aside and let him pass. He had overheard me, and Mr. Simpson said, "Byrd, I like you a lot, but you need to quit being so wild and reckless. Go back to Stephen. He needs you. It's bad over in New Mexico. Go home while you can, boy." I knew he was telling me nicely that he didn't want me hanging around his daughter. I told him I would leave early the next morning, for I was about ready to move on. Too, I thanked him for the advice which he knew I wouldn't heed. I didn't tell him what had just happened back home. I let him think I couldn't turn to farming. The next morning he paid me, and I rode off with Pearlie waving at me from a window. Mr. Simpson's good advice hadn't dampened my hankering for excitement one bit. I headed straight for Portales, New Mexico, which at the time considered to be an adobe house, which served as a post office and a general store. A saloon was kept in the adjoining building to the office. Only a single wall divided the two places, and there were 3 adobe dwellings. I laid in a small supply of provisions upon leaving Hale Center, so a small town then 8 miles from Simpson's 1,200-acre stock farm. I had passed the headquarter ranch for the Littlefield Land and Cattle Company on the Yellow House Canyons. I did not stop at the ranch house, for I wasn't hunting work just then. I did stop one night at one of the slaughter line camps. I did not fancy the country much after passing beyond the west line of Hale County. The country was deep, sandy soil covered with sage-grass, now and then a large alkali lake, which grew no vegetation. The water was strong with alkali that could stalk and kill it. I saw many good cattle that were locoed from eating a weed called the loco weed. When stock ate it, they would become crazy and would shake like a man in palsy. When they traveled, they walked as if they were trying to slip on something. They wouldn't eat anything but loco, if they could find it, and can scarcely be driven at all. They will fight a man on horseback, or if they meet a wagon, they will fight the team if they don't get out of the way. Horses also eat the loco weed. It comes up in the fall and grows through the winter months. Cold weather does not hurt it, and cattle and horses eat it at first because it's the only green vegetation there is. It looks inviting to them. It has no bad taste, and the more they eat, the more they crave. A locoed horse is the most provoking thing in the world. They won't lead and will pitch for all they're worth. You can be riding along and come to a cow trail. A darn critter will snort and jump as high as he can, as if he's forced to cross it. You can be riding leisurely along, and suddenly the locoed animal under you will decide to unpack. He wakes up, sticks his head between his feet, arches his back like a furious tomcat, and jumps high and fast. If you fail to stick to your saddle, you'll find yourself afoot and probably miles and miles from water and food. Thirsty and hungry, you can start back from whence you came. I never had to walk into a camp from being thrown by one of them, but have had the rascals follow me down, jerk loose, and leave me to walk in. I have tried. I have had them tied to a post while I greased a windmill or tended to a fence, and the horse would set back on the rope and break it. I would be left to walk in the sand, cursing and sweating and wishing I had never seen such thing as a locoed horse. From what we got the old saying, a man acts like he's been eating loco weed.